It's an honor to be with you this evening. We're going to work over a subject that I already see as close to our hearts. And if I should say anything in my remarks that would raise a question or objection in your mind, don't let that get away from you. We want to leave plenty of time at the last good bit of this meeting to have some interaction. And so if I offend you, you have a chance to get back in. 41 years ago, I was in the jungles of Vietnam. You remember, there's enough gray hair in this audience to remember that when that was the war of the day. And we had a draft back in those days, you remember. And I found myself in what I thought would be the most wasted year of my life. Only to be surprised by new opportunities and challenges that I had never anticipated. I found myself surrounded by a lot of young men who didn't have college deferments, and they were rounded up from the inner cities and rural areas and sent into that war zone. And there were a lot of kids with a lot of problems that I was surrounded by. And I had the opportunity to help some of those young men to get their high school GED diplomas, helped start an amnesty drug abuse program. There was mighty pure and inexpensive drugs available there. And so it became a very positive, almost redemptive, you would call it, experience that really changed my career path. I had been in business, but when I came back from the conflict, I couldn't shake that sense of, well, it almost became a sense of calling to work with troubled young men. And so I left my business career. I started a program with the juvenile courts in Atlanta and started working with some of those same kinds of kids. It didn't take too long to figure out that you can't work very effectively with a troubled young person apart from their family situations. And I went back to school to learn how to work with families and expanded our program to include both kids on probation and their families. But over time it became apparent that you can't be very effective with troubled families apart from the environment that impacts on them every time they step out of the door. And so it pushed me to get more involved in what was happening on the street and with some of the young gangs and with what was happening with the police and in the schools. The community needed to be changed, but how do you change an environment? I finally realized that if you're going to be most effective in really changing conditions, you need to be working from within. Becoming a part of a community and working inside the community for change. Now that's an insight that you don't share easily or quickly with one's wife. As a matter of fact, Peggy and I, incidentally, this is my new Peggy, my first Peggy, my bride of 35 years. I lost to breast cancer, and God graced me with another Peggy in my life. So I didn't have to memorize a new name. So talk about grace. But my first Peggy, we were in the process of building our dream home, a little farther out of the city. out closer to our church. And we're in the last stages of that building process. That's when you're picking out the carpet and the light fixtures and the cabinetry, all of those very high energy kinds of decisions. And I can tell by some of your reactions that you have been there before. I remember the night that it happened. We'd gone to bed early, and Peggy just wanted to talk. And I said, I don't think you want to talk to me tonight. And then it was, what's wrong? And so for the first time, I told her that I didn't think we were supposed to be moving farther out of the city, but that we were supposed to be moving into the city. That was a bad night. In the morning, Peggy says, is this your idea or God's idea? Because if it's your idea, I'm not interested at all. He said, I want it in writing. And that was the first time I wrote out what I sensed was a calling to move into the inner city with our two boys. And she took that 7-page letter around to her girlfriends and our small group leader and our pastors and concluded that at least I believed that it was a call of God. And if a real calling, what choice do you really have? And so Peggy gave up her dream home. And we got out of the contract, which was kind of amazing. And built a new home right down in the heart of inner city Atlanta, where there had been new construction in probably 50 years. Of course, both sets of parents advised us strongly against that. But we weren't there for real estate investment. We were there to be a part of the community and help to work for change from the inside. That was a 10-year process. And during that preceding 10 years, we've been involved in a lot of programs with kids and families in our inner city community. We've got the use of an old Presbyterian church that had closed down and opened that up. I set my office up there and we started serving out of that facility, serving the community. The programs I was feeling pretty good about. The feeding, clothing, working with kids, those high-touch kind of programs. One of the programs that I felt best about was what we called Adopt a Family at Christmas time. And so I would give the names of those kids that they weren't going to get much. I'd give the names, the ages, sizes, and caring families from the surrounding community would go shopping, and then on Christmas Eve, they would come and deliver those gifts to the families. And we put a lot of energy into that, and it brought a lot of excitement, and from my perspective, an awful lot of joy. But when we moved into the neighborhood, and for the first time, I had the opportunity to be in some of those homes when the gift-bearing families arrived. I saw something that I had never seen before. The kids, of course, were all excited, jumping up and down. The moms were gracious, a little reserved, maybe a little embarrassed. But if there was a dad in the household, he just disappeared. He was just gone out the back door. And it dawned on me what was happening is these folks in their own homes, in front of their own kids, were being exposed for their inability to provide. And the moms would endure that indignity for the sake of the kids. But it was just more than manly pride could handle. It was like for the dads, their impotence was being exposed in front of their wives and kids in their own living rooms, and it was killing them. I'd never seen that before. I realized there is a high price, a toll being extracted for the kind of charity that I've been doing. And it disturbed me. In those days, that was 30 years ago, I was reading everything that I could on urban work and urban transformation. And one of the authors that I came across was a French philosopher by the name of Jacques Ellul. And he wrote books on the city and poverty, that sort of thing. And I was in the midst of reading one of his books when a quote jumped off the page and just hit me in the heart. I'll read it to you. Ellul says, almsgiving is Mammon's perversion of giving. It affirms the superiority of the giver. It binds the recipient and demands gratitude. It humiliates him and leaves him in a lower state than he had before. Do you see why that hit me right in the heart? That's exactly what I was doing. And so it made me start looking at all of the charity that we were engaged in. The clothes closet, the food pantry, the service projects. The clothes closet was, well, that was a good learning experience. You know, it's pretty easy to collect clothes in this culture. We don't wear them out, except the men. And so it's pretty easy to collect clothes. And I noticed that when we opened the doors, it kind of, a herding instinct, sort of a greed took over somehow. I said, these are the free gifts that caring people have been freely given. Help yourself. And that was the beginning of a charge in there to grab as many clothes as folks could stuff in as many bags as they could carry out. And I'd find those bags of clothes. I'd find the clothes scattered around the community, and of course they didn't have any place to try them on. And so I said, this is not good stewardship here. And so we said, we've got to limit the number of these garments, limit the number of visits for one thing, and then put a limit on how many garments that you can get. Well, that was like saying, let the games begin. Can I get some garments for my kids that are in school? That seems reasonable. Can I get some garments for my sick uncle? You see where it's going. And so in no time, we were behaving like temple police, guarding the resources of the kingdom against the very folks we were there to serve among. It was an adversarial relationship that emerged almost overnight. It wasn't the idea of community building and mutual supportiveness. It didn't come out that way. The food pantry wasn't any better. It was hard to do it equitably. You know, when you have 24 canned hams donated, and you've got 50 people standing in line, how do you distribute that equitably? And somebody gets corn, and somebody gets pickled beets. And they can't really criticize overtly, but you know just under the surface there's a lot of dissatisfaction that's going on here. Again, it was not building trusting, mutually supportive relationships. It was just the opposite of that. It was pseudo-relationships that were growing, which is what tends to happen between givers and recipients, the givers of one-way charity. Our service projects, we did lots of those. all kinds of groups, church groups, school, businesses. We're big into service in our society. And so we coordinated an awful lot of service projects. And it did a lot of good. And, but I was sitting, while this stuff was going on in my mind, I was sitting on my porch one day with one of my neighbors across the street, a low-income neighbor, Virgil. We were talking about neighborly things, and a 14-passenger van came by the house, kind of going slow, and some kids were in there waving and smiling. And Virgil said, I just hate it when those volunteers come down here. And I said, really? He said, I thought you liked volunteers down here. He said, oh, they do good. But he said, they insult you, they don't even know they're insulting you. And then he tells me about a woman that came, a volunteer that came into their house and was just going on and on about how clean and neat it was. He said, I know what was behind that. She was kind of hiding a feeling that black people in the inner city live in hovels. And he said that there's one woman was commenting about how bright and well-behaved his children were. Compliment. And he said, I know what's behind that. That it's, in her expectations, I wasn't like the other black inner city families whose kids are dumb and rowdy. He said, they insult you, don't even know. Well, I want to tell you that these insights that just kept flooding into me really were not only disturbing, but I realized something's got to change here. We've got to do things differently. I had to admit that I did enjoy the position of giving. That is a superior giving. And now I put that in a facade of humility, but it was certainly nicer to be a giver than a recipient. Began to see that one-way giving tends to be a form of a put-down. It subtly communicates you have nothing of value which I desire in return. I became aware of a progression. It's more of a regression, a downward cycle. If you give somebody something once, you elicit appreciation. Oh, thank you very much. Surprise, delight. If you do it twice, you start to create some anticipation. Oh, wonder if he's going to keep this up. Do it again. By the third time, you've created an expectation. When's it coming again? When do I get mine? By the fourth time, it's become an entitlement. I don't want a turkey. I want a ham. I like it this way. It's an entitlement. You owe it to me. Fifth time, it's just dependence. Can't stop now. We're depending on this. I noticed that kind of a downward spiral going on with our one-way giving, and I said, we got to get out of this. And so he said, we're going to stop all this, and the only giving we're going to do is when somebody is in crisis. Whereupon the incidence of crises skyrocketed. Everybody had crises. Well, wait a minute. There's a difference here between a crisis, a real crisis, and a function of chronic poverty. There's a difference here. And so we had to start figuring out what is a real crisis and what is a result of chronic poverty. In the time of a real crisis, the right response is an emergency response. It's like when an earthquake hits Haiti. We got to get in there with medical supplies and clothing and water and tents. That's the right response, an emergency response to a real crisis. But a chronic need needs a different response. It needs a development response. The crisis is past. Now we have to help folks start rebuilding their lives and their businesses and their infrastructure. That's a development approach. It's longer. It's not quite as exciting as the crisis intervention, but it's absolutely essential. So if you address a crisis need with an emergency response, lives are saved. But if you address a chronic need with an emergency response, people are harmed. Take Katrina, remember that one? When it hit New Orleans, and we watched on our evening news, folks stranded at the top of buildings. It was a calamity, and the whole country came around that to address that crisis need. It wasn't very organized or pretty, but boy, it needed a crisis response, and that's what we provided. You know, there are groups that still go in 7 years later, still go into New Orleans, food, clothes, ministering to the victims of Katrina. You get that? Victims. Perpetuated a victim culture of folks that should have been developed and programs that should be developing people certainly within a year after that calamity. That's doing an emergency response to a chronic poverty issue. Here's what I conclude, that one-way giving, this kind of emergency response, it does not produce integrity in relationships. Instead of empowering people, it disempowers them. When you do for those in need what they have the capacity to do for themselves, it isn't kindness, it's disempowering. It's taking responsibility away. It's removing the exercise that builds muscle, capacity, self-sufficiency. It erodes a work ethic. It enhances and increases dependency. It diminishes self-esteem. I was in Nicaragua, been involved down there, a very interesting project, talking with a banker there, a Nicaraguan banker, who turned micro-lender, these small loans for peasant people to help them build their businesses up. And I said, Juan, how are you working with the churches here in Nicaragua? And he was a little evasive, and I said, no, I'm really interested. Are the churches engaged in this at all? And he said, Bob, there are whole sections of Nicaragua that we can't do any micro-lending in at all. He says, that's the area where there's a concentration of church partnerships with U.S. churches. He said, my people say, why do we want to borrow money? They give it to us. Why do we want to borrow money to build a church? They build it for us. And then he said, Bob, they are turning my people into beggars. The ambassador from Honduras contacted me a few months ago. Somebody had given her that book, Toxic Charity, and she said, we got to talk. We met, and she said, Bob, there are more than 10,000 NGOs functioning in Honduras, NGOs, nonprofits, functioning in Honduras, most U.S. supported, and she said, they are ruining my country. That isn't what we intend. We intend to help. There's something that goes wrong with one-way giving. Well, here's what we decided to do. We can't keep on disempowering people. We said, let's narrow our focus focus to one community. We can't serve everybody in south side of Atlanta. We'll narrow our scope so that we have the ability to build some relationships with folks, so that there's some measure of accountability here. And then we'll adjust our thinking to look at our neighbors as people with capacities rather than needs. And begin to believe that everyone in our community has something to contribute. Everybody has a talent, has a resource, has an ability that, if employed, would benefit the community. Another way of saying it is, nobody is so poor that they have nothing to give. That's what we do. And then we said, we will never do for others what they have the capacity to do for themselves. And with that, we started changing our whole paradigm of doing service. That adopt a family for Christmas. The second Christmas that we were there, as folks started to call in to get their adopted family, I asked them to give an extra gift. And they said, well, what's that? I said, would you give the gift of dignity to the dads? I said, here's how you do that. Go shopping, buy the toys, but don't wrap them. Bring them we'll set up a little toy shop. And we'll put somewhere between a wholesale and a yard sale price on those toys. And we'll invite parents to come in and go shopping. So on Christmas morning, parents in our community have the same joy as most parents do, seeing their kids open the gifts that they selected, that they knew would bring joy to their kids' heart, earned through the efforts of their own hands. And if they don't have any money, well, we're creating cash flow here. That means we can hire folk. So even if you don't have money, you can work and earn and buy toys for your kids. Well, that's a kind of a quantum leap. Letting us sell toys that folks are going to get. But I said, listen, what a kid really needs, actually more than a toy, is an effective parent. And so we're going to take the proceeds from this and set up a training program that will train parents and move them into the economic mainstream, so that it will be creating jobs that parents can support their family on through the year. That gift will keep on giving all year long. And when folks got that, they were willing to do it. Now I said the extra gift is, you know, the feeling that you get when you bring those toys, you see those kids excited, you know that feeling. They all did. I said, that's what I want you to give to the dads. That's what they need. And so that changed the whole dynamic of things. Here's what it taught us. It taught us a universal truth. That everyone loves to find a bargain. Universal. Doesn't matter what culture. Peggy came home this past Christmas season, and after a day of Christmas shopping, and she laid out in the living room all of her treasures for me to admire. And she said, and you know what? She said, I saved more than I spent. Now you got to explain the economics of it. But you get what that was about. Everybody loves to find a bargain. The poor love to find bargains. And so creating a little toy store in the community meant that low-income folks in our community had the joy of participating in the economic exchange of our community. And not only could they provide toys for their kids, but they had the joy of participating in a bargain. Interesting. Here's another thing that we found out. that low-income parents would a whole lot rather work to earn to purchase toys for their kids than they would stand in the free toy lines with their proof of poverty to accept a gift that somebody else had selected for their children. That's what we found. The clothes closet. This adversarial relationship, you gotta control things, you gotta make sure folks don't get too much. Well, I was explaining that to, it was a Methodist men's group that had helped us collect clothes. And I said, this isn't what we envision here. It's adversarial. And they said, well, there's a simple answer to that. You know, those that aren't there always have a simple answer. I said, no, it's called the market. You put a fair rated exchange on a desired commodity, it cuts all that out. Really? Yeah. I said, would you guys help us set that up? And so they had a meeting and said, yeah, we'll take that on as our missions project this year. Those guys set about doing what they do in their sleep. Anyhow, got to have a business plan. Got to do real estate research, traffic flow patterns, got to be on a bus line, got to shut off the competition, got to bring this in right underneath the Salvation Army. They said if we do it right, this thing ought to make money, and that should enable us to hire trainees to train them in retail merchandising. But it's got to be state-of-the-art cash register, barcodes. But yeah, this could be a self-sustaining training program as well as providing affordable food in the community. They said it takes about 2 years to set up a small business like this, and they were right. About 18 months later, that little business moved into the black and has never looked back. Bright spot in the community. And it has done that. It has moved scores of trainees from unemployment and underemployment into the economic mainstream. You know, it changed the dynamic instantly between that giver-recipient dynamic where you have to guard into a merchant-customer dynamic. Merchants need customers. Now it's not a question of keeping them from getting too much. Now it's a question of how do we get them to buy more? Because the dimes and the dollars of the poor in our community are what we need to pay the light bill and to meet payroll. We need them. And so now the question is, how do you keep customers coming back? That's a whole different challenge right there. And so our trainees, this is part of the training. How do we do that? Marketing. And I said, well, you really got to get people's names down so everybody knows who they are when they come in, and you should learn something about their family. So when Miss Jones comes in, you can say, good morning, Miss Jones, how are you? And how is your mom doing? Everybody loves to go where everybody knows their name. I'll be a sitcom like this. We jumped in a van, went out to the shopping mall to shop for little clothing stores. It was really fascinating, baby knows. The debrief was really interesting. First of all, they said, well, they were very nice to us. That's one thing. The customer service was good. And when you come in, there's the latest fashion arrivals are right there where you see them. And then there's big signs on the sale items that are next so that you can. And those hangers are all going the same way. And they're all the same hangers, and they're sized too. Everybody knows that. One of the women said, yeah, you know, and those stores smell nice too. Well, there's a little concern. When you're dealing in used clothing, you know, sometimes it can be a little stale. And you don't have money to dry clean everything. But so, I'm thinking, what can we do about that negative aroma in our store? Well, one of the women said, said, if we had a pot of fresh brewed coffee going in the morning, that would help. Another one said, yeah, we get some microwave cookies going in the morning, that would help. And so you come walking in the store, and the aroma of fresh coffee and cookies is what first greets you. That's brilliant. How we keep those customers coming back and valuing them. It's one of God's magical gifts called the economy. And it functions in every culture for all of time. It goes like this. This guy over here has a good crop of apples this year, certainly more than he can eat. And this guy over here has done well with his sheep this year and has more wool than his family needs. And so they look at each other and they come to a bargaining table and they work out an exchange. And both of them go away feeling like they got more than they brought. That's magic. That's why Peggy was so excited about. She got more than she brought. At least that was her perception. But it's God's gift to humanity. It's the economy. It's sort of magical. It's in that exchange process that communities are built and wealth is created. That's a gift. Why on earth do we want to exclude the poor among us from that process? Everybody has something of value to bring to the bargaining table. And it becomes the responsibility of those who steward resources to figure out what those systems of exchange are. To find out what are those talents, abilities, resources that people can bring to the bargaining table in exchange for other resources. That's our responsibility. The food program, that food bank, or that food line, was always problematic to me. And so one day we said to those standing in line, anybody interested in a food co-op? And folks said, what is that? And I said, well, put in $3. And we take that with a little money from our food pantry, and we go over to the Atlanta Food Bank. That's where surplus foods are gathered in. And as a nonprofit, we can buy food by the pound, 12, 14 cents a pound. You get a lot of food for a little bit of processing money. And so there were 12 women that said, yeah, they'd be interested in trying that, and they put their $3 in. And when we came back from the food bank with the food that their money purchased, they were amazed. It was like $50. And they were absolutely delighted, and the word got out quickly, and we had a whole bunch more folks wanting to sign up for the food co-op. This was a good deal. Before long, there were 75 families, 75 households that was packing out the basement of our church. The first issue that came up was our staff guy was not bringing home the right assortment of food. And so there was some grumbling about that. And so we said, well, why don't you elect a buyer to take your grocery list? And that was the first organizational step. They elected one from among them to do their grocery work. And now she got what they wanted. A little bit of organization, a little bit of talent coming out of this group. The next issue that came up was, what about credit? What if somebody doesn't have their $3 this week? Do we extend credit? Well, it was our decision. They were the ones that had all the skin in the game. It was their risk, so it was their decision. Well, the debate just went on and on. Should we do it maybe once, and then if they don't pay back, we'll cut them off? Or up to the secretary. And then they said, well, but who's going to keep track of who pays and doesn't and collects the money? We need a treasurer. Now, community is coming out of what was formerly a prideless line of food recipients. Now, community is beginning to emerge. Interdependency. Talents coming out of that group. Talents that we had never seen in use before. The discussions, of course, around food led to recipes and who cooked what. And somebody said, have you ever tasted Mabel's sweet potato pie? It's to die for. And so they persuaded Mabel to bring in a pie on their food day, and everybody had a sample of it. And they said, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Well, that started other folks saying, I can bring this and that. And so Food Day, Distribution Day, became a kind of a gourmet sampling day of the culinary skills that were in that group. A couple of the women came to us and said, could we use the kitchen in the church basement to fix some of our food, fix some meals for ourselves? I said, sure, that'd be a great idea. And so they're taking the food that they've purchased from the food bank and are fixing a hot meal for themselves and other folks in the community, which starts to eliminate the need of the suburban churches that sign up to come in to bring a hot meal to the poor. They're doing it themselves. Two of those women said, you know, we've had a vision, a dream all of our lives to have a restaurant. And so they came to us and said, could you help us start a restaurant? And we said, we don't know anything about restaurants. But we know a guy that runs a restaurant, and we want to talk with him. And so we set that meeting up, and he told them what a daunting process it is, and what kind of the money, the risk, the health department on your back, how many go out of business in the first year, very discouraging realities, and they were undaunted. And they said, but would you help us if we go ahead with it? I said, well, give me advice. Help to figure out the budget. Not a little budget, big budget. And so they said, do you know anybody that knows how to write proposals that we could send to foundations here in Atlanta to help us start this? And we did. We knew somebody. And so it took about 2 years of preparatory kind of work before that opening day came. If you're at a Braves game and you look out across the parking lot, there's a little concrete block building painted bright yellow, but over the top it has written tummy and soul. And you get some of the best down-home cooking in there that you've ever grilled with. And on those tables in there, they have little cards that say, tummy and soul, an outgrowth of the George Avenue Food Co-op. There's talents and abilities, creativity and dreams that we just look over and we see need. We don't realize the tremendous amount of potential that is there. Let me finish up here. I'll circle back to Virgil, my neighbor, sitting on the porch. And he's complaining about those volunteers. And so I said, Virgil, should we just not have volunteers come down here? And he said, no. He said, they do good. Actually, he built his house and did volunteer go up. He said, no, they do good. But he said, it would really help if we did the inviting. Write that down. Community initiated. And he said it would help too if we decide on what the projects were. We know what we want. We know what lot if we did the identification of what we needed help with. That would help. Community initiated. He said it would be helpful too if we could lead those projects. He said, we don't have all the skills to do that, but at least we could be coordinating. Right there, neighbor led. He said, I'll tell you another thing. He said, these folks come down and treat us like we're lost pagans. He mentions a thing called the least, the last, and the lost. He said they have no idea how God is at work in our community and in our lives. He said it would really be nice if we could have a time to sit and share how God is alive and work in our neighborhood and in our community and among our families. That would really be nice. Write that down. Virgil helped us to transform a service project into a mutual exchange of talents where lives can be shared, talents can be surfaced, leadership can be encouraged. Virgil did that for us. Well, I'll finish up with this. I think it's an insert that maybe is going to get passed out tonight. I decided that as helpers, folks that serve those in need, we needed a kind of a code of conduct. Hippocrates had that same feeling about 300 years before Christ. You know, the father of modern medicine. And he came up with a code of ethics for physicians called the Hippocratic Oath. And physicians to this day take the Hippocratic Oath. I said, well, why don't we have something like that in Congress? And so here's my first shot at it. Let me give it to you. First of all, I will never do for others what they have the capacity to do for themselves. That's one. The second thing is I will limit my one-way giving to emergencies and always seek ways for legitimate exchange. 3, I will empower the poor by hiring, lending, investing, and use those gifts and grants as incentives for achievement. 4, I'll put the interest of the poor above my own interest or that of my organization and subordinate my agenda to their interests. 5, I'll listen carefully to both spoken and unspoken needs, knowing that a lot of unspoken needs reveal truths. I'll give you a quick example of that I just, one of our staff folks came back from Haiti recently. And the group that they were with were going along the streets of a small rural village and saw these moms with their little babies wrapped in dirty rags and newspapers. And their hearts were just moved. And so when they went back into the city that evening, they bought up a bunch of blankets and took those new blankets out and distributed them the following day to these moms so that they would have something clean to swaddle their babies. And the following day, when they came into that village, they saw those blankets on the shelves of the markets along the street. And they realized those women had sold those blankets. And they were incensed until one of the workers there said, they sold the blankets for food. Their need is to feed their babies more than blankets for their babies. That's I'll listen carefully determine the spoken and unspoken needs of those I will serve. And then the last one is the same as the Hippocratic Oath, same as the last one, point of the Hippocratic Oath, and that is, above all, to the best of my ability, I will do no harm. Amen. Let's see what kind of questions, reactions. We got a floating mic here, so comments, questions, reactions, things that we want to talk over.
Would you like us to mention our names when we stand up?
That would be good.
As I said when we met. Thank you for the most inspiring talk. Your pictures of the fragments have been absolutely wonderful. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the effect on the whole community. I mean, I just choose one word, crime, but maybe behavior of children and families. Could you extend what you said to that, rather above the wonderful examples you gave us?
You get that question, what downstream impact this has had? Well, these are small examples of services. And I need to confess to you that services do not move communities out of poverty. With all of the good services that we provide, they will not move out of poverty. The only thing that enables a community to move out of poverty is wealth creation, jobs. And so a part of our strategy for community transformation, certainly we do good charity, good programs, service programs that are not toxic. That's important. But in order to bring a community out of poverty, you've got to create some economic viability there, which means generating enough income in the community to attract legitimate businesses like a supermarket. How do you get a supermarket into a community? Well, that was one of our first challenges when we moved in. How do you, right across the street from our house, our new house that we built, there's a little grocery store. And the first week we were there, Peggy sent me across for a gallon of milk. And I came back and she asked for her change. I gave her a few pennies. And she says, "Where's the rest of it?" And I said, "That's it." And she said, "You're kidding me." And she marched over to that store and she came back and she said, "We will never buy anything there again." She said, "A gallon of milk is almost twice what I've been paying out at the supermarket." Now I see a steady stream of my neighbors buying their groceries at that little store. Those with limited incomes paying twice as much for groceries as we have to pay. Something's wrong here. And so I knew a fella in one of the major chains. You have Kroger over here? Yeah. He's a Kroger VP. And so I said, could you see about putting a grocery store in our community? And he said he'd do a study. And a few weeks later, he came back with the results of that, and he said, "Your community wants to stay in a grocery store." And I said, "Oh, wait a second. The density in this community is a whole lot greater than the suburbs where you're building these stores." And I said, "As far as I know, everybody has to eat." And he said, "Well, you really don't understand our business, do you?" And I said, "Well, I thought you were in the food business." And he said, No. He said, "We don't make our money on food." He said, "The margins on food are like 2%. He said, "We make our money on all those non-food stamp items. The alcohol, tobaccos, balloons, cosmetics, flowers, all of those non-food items." He says, "That's where the margins are." He said, "You don't have enough disposable income in this community to sustain a store." So I said, "Well, how do we get you to put a store in there?" He said, "Get your disposable income up." Well, you're talking to a psychologist, not an economist. You know that in our community now there are 2 major chain stores, supermarkets competing for the disposable income that has come into that community. It's a thing called gentrification. And it's happening in every city across the land. And young professionals are moving back in. They're fixing up old downtown areas and old Victorian houses. And they're coming back in, and they're coming in with the money.
And driving people out.
That's the downside. So gentrification becomes a curse on those who rent and lower income and rent. And so then the challenge of the nonprofits, folks that have a concern for the poor, is how to do gentrification with justice. And you can do that. And so in our cases, we're trying to learn how it works. We're saying, yeah, let's encourage young professionals to move back, but let's make sure that we get ample property at affordable prices so that affordability can remain in this community, so that the poor share in the benefits of the reviving community. You see how that moves us away from a service orientation to an economic development orientation? And it did that for us. It shifted us into housing very quickly. And so service, as vital as it is, without economic stimulation in a community, will just never go anywhere. The poor will remain poor as long as we keep feeding them. Does that get at your issue? Okay, yeah.
I was going to try this without the microphone there. I'm Jim. I was wondering, if you would comment, you kind of talked about it on the edges, comment on formal education and its role, funding formal education for people with great chronic property.
The education system. Yeah. Well, if you get any news out of Atlanta, you will know that we have had our struggles with the educational system. Test scores are going up marvelous. Those darn reporters. One of the things that happens when a community starts to stir with new life, and incidentally, for us, that's an intentional strategy. In a low-income community, how do you attract into that community people of means? That's an intentional strategy. Not displacing folks, but bringing into the mix folks with means. Those gentry, those young folks that are coming back, as soon as they have kids, that education issue is front and center. And the good news is they are very creative and very persistent, and they'll do about one of 4 things. They'll either get into a local elementary school and start really turning it around. They'll work to get the school system to do a charter school so they have control of that. Or they'll start a private school in the community, or they'll do homeschooling. But they will educate their kids. And so if we can get to them with a message of community transformation, how what you do can benefit all of the folks in the community, then the chances are pretty good that you can see significant improvement in a school. Very, very difficult to improve the quality of education when you have children. The majority of your children are on a survival agenda. Very, very difficult. And so you need folks that are freed up from survival, that are on an achiever agenda, to take on those issues of education that, if done well, will benefit all of those kids. So, for example, we've done 2 charter schools now in our 2 different communities that we've been a part of. Our latest one is a International Baccalaureate School. You know, that's the School of Diplomats around the world. It's an accreditation. Gender separate. Little girls, little boys learn at different rates, different ways. And dual language right from kindergarten up. Our second language is Chinese. Because when those kids graduate, Chinese is going to be the second language of international trade. And if you're bilingual, the world's open to you. And so, and we got the school board to agree to, not to do a quota, but to allow us to aim our marketing so that we would get a good economic mix. And we've had, right from the day we opened, a 60-40 mix. 60% of kids that are not on free and reduced lunch, and 40% that are. That's how you kind of measure that to those two groups. And the quality of that education is very high, and the PTA energy goes into making sure that those kids that have started behind the curve get the additional support and after-school programs to help them make the bar, as opposed to lowering the bar for a lower standard. Gentry would do that. And so, yeah, go ahead.
But I guess my question, what I'm hoping you were going to touch on was, how do you encourage, it's one thing to bring in salaried adults that have children in school, but I guess I was looking at the thing that says we have parents that are dependent on charity at this point. And how do you increase the educational level of those parents who can be trained in some kind of a trade or a skill or a profession to become more independent, and in turn teach their kids that, see, we can do this by ourselves?
Yeah, that's not only an educational issue, that's a whole values issue for families. And the thing that I have seen work best is decent employment. There's a kind of a feeling among chronically poor folks that no matter how hard I work, we're never going to get out of here. So the images that they have seen growing up is hard work does not equal getting ahead. Hard work equals continued poverty. And so work starts to lose its importance and its value. But a good job with health coverage that starts changing the lifestyle, that has a real influence on it. Work becomes much more valuable. And so it's not just, I'll quit this job today and I'll get some later. But that's again, that comes back to economics, you know? Okay, let's keep this rolling. We've got some other comments. Okay.
My name is Frank McCoy. I'm associated with St. Francis by the Sea.
Talk into that mic, Frank.
I'm associated with St. Francis by the Sea Resources. I've been involved with not only St. Francis, but some years ago I was involved with St. Vincent de Paul at Holy Family Church. And we're very fortunate here on Hilton Head. It's not Atlanta, it's Hilton Head. So the majority of people on this island are pretty well off. But we do have a number of people that need help occasionally. And generally, unfortunately, what we do, we solve people's problems by throwing money at them. And we do an awful lot of that because it's the easiest thing to do. You know, a lot of the people that we deal with really need counseling, and most of us are not professional counselors. So we end up, our people that our parishioners are very generous with the funds they give us, and so if a person needs their rent paid, we throw money at it. If they need their electric bill paid, we throw money at it, which is obviously the easiest thing to do. Now, I'm sure things in Atlanta where there's a lot more poverty, because poverty here is cyclical. Most of the people here that are, maybe you might consider poor, work at the resorts. And so they work and then they're off through the winter winter when things are not busy, so they need help. And they need help with their electric bill in the winter, and they may be fine through the summer. And so that's the issue that we confront as to how can we really solve these issues when it's so easy just to toss money.
You raise a really important issue that I think most all of us experience, that it's just a whole lot easier to give folks stuff than it is to work on developing people.
Right.
And it's a whole lot easier to run a clothes closet than it is to run a thrift store or to give away food pantry than it is to do a co-op. It is more difficult and it is more costly. But I hope that you hear me say tonight that that kind of one-way giving is ultimately not helpful.
I understand,
Yeah.
and I agree.
Yeah,
But it's so much easier to do the other thing.
it is.
Because you're solving some people's problems.
For the moment. For the moment. What you're also doing is setting up a dependency system, which we all know is not helpful.
Oh, no question.
And I would say that religious or charitable dependency systems are worse than government dependency systems. We could go into that, but there's certainly the need in a civilized society for a safety net. And what you all do with cyclical needs, where folks, you can predict that there's going to be unemployment, I don't have a clue how to deal with that, but I would guess that the kind of both experience and minds, intelligence, and resources in a room like this could come up with a pretty darn good system of how to address that. I have no idea, but if that were a goal, if you say we have cyclical property, folks are doing fine for 8 months out of the year, but there's 4 months that it's bad, or whatever that formula is. Who knows what that might look like? Is that some sort of creating alternative jobs in the city
But to do
that
that,
would employ them? I
to
don't
do
know.
that, you really need to get involved personally with people. And that's the issue. How do you do that? Or do you want to?
Well,
It's not easy.
I think the difficulty is we as Americans really like things easy and fast. And if somebody can come up with a system of easy and fast, boy, we love it. That's why this, I don't know if you guys have it here or not, that backpack buddies, kids are hungry on the weekends and that sort of thing. That thing is going well, and churches love it because it's so easy, and you can do it in mass, and it seems so right. It's awful. It's just awful. We have no idea what's happening with that food on the user end. We don't know if that food's being turned into illicit activities. We don't know if the kids are getting that food at all. One thing we do know, it's not strengthening the capacity of those parents. We know that. We know better than to subsidize inactivity. We know better than that. But it's so tempting to do it easy and fast and large. But what you're talking about is a lot more personal involvement.
Right.
We've got 2 more questions over here.
Just one other comment. I'm amazed at the number of people here this afternoon, and I had no idea that there were that many. I don't know anybody here.
Well, you need to get acquainted with these people.
I know a couple of people, but basically, I've never seen so many people involved in decisions. And I suspect that if we got together somehow, that...
So you're Catholic, right?
Yes.
How many Catholics in this room? Oh, look at this. Look at this. Come on, that'll be easy. All right, we got to get to some other friends
suggestion
here.
would be that maybe we should get together as a group and talk about
I
it.
think that's a good idea.
Hi, my name's Chris Binkley. Do you think your experiences are transferable to very rural areas?
I don't know. I don't know how transferable that is. I think the philosophy is transferable. But rural is spread out a lot, and it's hard to do things. It's not like you can pick a community and focus your energies on that. So it is a different, it's a different issue. And I don't have experience in that, but I think principles will probably work. But how to implement, I don't know. I can't speak to it.
Hi, Dr. Lewis. Thanks very much for being here. I'm Doug Adamson. My question is, and you touched on this briefly, that it occurs to me that the greatest source of one-way giving that leads to dependence is the government. You mentioned that the government is easier in many regards, or not easier, but better. And would you please elaborate on that and touch on the opportunities and challenges in working in that system?
You're trying to help me. A civilized society has to have safety nets for its most vulnerable people. That's a given. So food stamps is that for a lot of folks. And it is a good and necessary temporary safety net, to keep folks from falling clear out the bottom from the start. And I say temporary because when folks become used to it and settle into it as an entitlement, it weakens them. And I don't blame anybody for taking government assistance. Any business guy is going to do it. He's going to take a tax break whenever he can. That's government assistance. So let's not fault the poor for taking advantage of it. The difficulty with government programs is that the only way those running those bureaucracies show success and move up is to increase their budgets. And so they're always asking for more this year. That's just the way of it. And so now I don't know what it is. One in 7 Americans or something like that is getting food stamps. That's awful. That should be temporary help in a time of need, as opposed to an ongoing entitlement that takes us back in the direction that the Welfare Reform Act of '96 was supposed to clear up. That government entitlements were not a lifestyle guarantee. We made that decision as a nation. But there's mission creep that goes on, and of course the justification now is because of the bad economy, and there's some legitimacy to that. But that's not what's driving this. What's driving this is a philosophy that says we're the richest country in the world, therefore we owe the poor lots of stuff.
If you listen to the nightly news, it's Obama's fault.
Well, yeah, you're trying to out me here. Well, at any rate, you see where I'm coming from. And it doesn't mean I'm a Republican. It does mean I'm on the side of the poor. And to subsidize capable people is to hurt them. That's the bottom line.
My name's Margaret Kahn. You've given us great enlightenment on the recipient end of this equation. I was wondering if you could address the donor side of it a little more. You talked about the Christmas baskets and getting people to give the gift of parent responsibility to the parents. But could you talk a bit more about how you solicit donations for what the donor side of all the equation in making this shift?
Well, let me try. This kind of philosophy is calling for a different kind of donor involvement. Instead of being involved either as volunteers or as financial supporters of programs that seem good, that are measured largely by activities and not outcomes. How many kids have we fed? How many clothes have we given away? How many projects have we done? How many volunteers? Instead of measuring activities, on the donor side of the equation, we need to begin measuring outcomes. And the good news is that ROI, return on investment, those folks that are doing that kind of work, the business people, and they're always the one that say what's return on investment. They always go to the bottom line. They're asking the right questions these days because they've been given the money. They're the wealth creators, and they've been given the money to do all these wonderful work. They're beginning to ask really good questions about what about downstream outcomes? Is this really helping people? For all of our charitable efforts and our clothing and food and grants and both nationally and internationally, for all of that, the charity industry is huge. For all of that, are we moving the economic needle? No. As a matter of fact, it's creeping in many places in the wrong direction. So the guys that are asking ROI questions are right on a cutting edge of history right now. And so they're the ones, and board members are the ones that say, we want to see what kind of outcomes you're talking about. If we're feeding a family, okay, but what is the plan for self-sufficiency for that family? If we're doing employment training, what's the downstream permanent employment in a job for those folks? So we're starting to look at ROI in terms of outcomes. That's one of the reasons why the charity industry has gotten toxic as it has. It's because we haven't been asking the ROI questions. We're doing it now, and that's a very, very healthy turn of events. We got one more here?
Last question.
Okay.
This is for, my name is Charmian, and we do a Christmas program. How much of a backlash did you get from people who were in the entitlement phase, and how did you work them through to realize that this was better for them in the long run?
Backlash from recipients or
When you go from entitling them, giving them everything, to saying now we're going to have something back.
The food co-op, absolutely none, because we didn't end the food pantry. We just created the food co-op alongside of it, and folks saw that that was a benefit, and the food pantry just dwindled. It's still there, but we hardly ever give any food out of it, because the model was just better. And so creating a working model alongside the old model, that has been a helpful way. There was a little bit of grumbling about the clothes closet being shut down, and now we're charging for clothes. What helped that issue was when they saw their neighbors working in the store, and now this was creating jobs for them. That helped a lot. But haven't gotten a lot of negative press. The Christmas store now, there's still a lot of giveaway toys. The Marines do toys for tots, and there's Angel Tree, and there's all kinds of toys flowing at Christmas time. And so our Pride for Parents program, in comparison to that, is small, but it's just right in the middle of our community. And this last year, we had 15 come through that little store, buying toys for their kids. Now, I'm sure that some of those same families are getting other things from other places. And that's not something that I'm going to take on. I just want to create some models that show a better way. And for those families, it's clearly their choice. The pride, the dignity, the bargains, even put stuff in layaway. I mean, who doesn't want to participate in the company? So, not much with that.
Thank you so much.
Yes.